at the federal courthouse in Fort Pierce, Florida. That is St. Lucie County, where Ryan Routh, the suspect who is accused of plotting to assassinate President Trump, is in court today. Jury selection underway for the trial. Opening arguments expected to begin on Thursday. And a couple of interesting notes here in this case, because Ryan Routh is representing himself in this case. He is facing up to life in prison in connection with this case. And joining us live now via Zoom to kind of talk about what we can expect in this trial as is Jose Rivas, a criminal defense attorney who is not associated with this case, but we've had, Jose, we've had you on I don't know how many times, and now you always do a great job breaking all these topics down for us, and we appreciate you joining us this afternoon here on Florida Live.
Pleasure to be here.
Jose, this is obviously a trial that is going to be getting a lot of attention. First, I just want to kind of talk about jury selection in a trial like this and what it would be like trying to seat a jury for something when you're talking about an attempted assassination of the president.
Well, you know, when you want to pick a jury, you're fishing for the best team. It's like picking a team for any sport. You want to pick those that have the same vision that you do. You want to pick those that can relate to you. But there's also a lot of rules. There's a lot of rules that must be followed, the type of questions that must be answered. And representing yourself can prove a challenge getting through that process for the court and for the judge.
To that end, we do know, as I mentioned, I said that Ryan Routh is representing himself in this, and we saw some reporting earlier from Fox News that the judge had to toss out some of Routh's questions for jury selection. Can you give us an idea of the kinds of, kind of what that process is like when it comes to what you are allowed and what you might not be allowed to ask of the jury when you're trying to find out who you want to be seated for that trial?
Well, you're trying to pick somebody that's, you want to be impartial, so to speak. So you don't want to pick somebody just because there's some kind of ethnic race, for example, or they make X amount of money. There's ways to ask questions and be able, and usually when they sit down to panel, you'll have a list of notes. What do they do for a living? Where do they work? What kind of, do they have any kind of history? Usually they don't, but you'll know a little bit about this individual. And that way you can, if they're a school teacher, you'll be able to ask them questions based on that. So that's the key. The key is, you got to ask questions where they're not going to violate, some of the rules of the game, for example. You don't want the other party or give the impression you're just trying to pick individuals based on some kind of racial profiling, on some kind of economic, those could be done, but you have to have a parameter. There's a way to ask a question for all of those.
Routh is, as we said, representing himself in this, but we are told there are attorneys that are kind of on standby to help out if needed. How does that kind of work in situations like this where you have someone representing themselves and some other attorneys who are there, I guess, if needed?
Well, again, it's just like playing in a field in a sport. You're coming here, and the reality is, in a judicial system, the truth does not matter. And I'll say that again: the truth does not matter. It's the evidence that's admissible. So a lot of time you can have a picture, for example, and you want to present it to the jury. There's a procedure. You have to authenticate it first before you can present it to them. So it's mostly about procedure. That's the reason they're there. He's going to be first chair. He's going to have these individuals in the background, perhaps to teach him or show him, hey, this is how you introduce this picture, but he's going to be running the show. He's going to be making the calls, what evidence comes in, what evidence he wants to object to, if there's any kind of motion that need to be done. But it's very risky. It's going to be a trial. It's going to take a lot longer than it really should take, just based because he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know the rules of the game.
Yeah, let's go into that a little bit, because I'm curious what a jury makes of that when you have a defendant trying to represent themselves, and that does it turn into, or is it at risk of kind of turning into a bit of a sideshow and a distraction for the jury trying to focus on the details of this case, but maybe having to get swept up in some of the procedural happenings and other mistakes that Routh may make in trying to defend himself?
Correct. This is what I call an appeals nightmare. What happens is that, the judge can't give him any slack because he doesn't know the rules, because he's not an attorney, because he's not trained. He's got to apply the same set of rules for evidence to the prosecution and to him for the defense. So he can't cut him any slack. So what happens is that he's going to have to make those decisions, and they might be tough decisions. But again, and sometimes you'll be like, okay, this evidence, it's a great piece of evidence, but since you don't know how to introduce that piece of evidence, you just lost your case. And remember, in a case like this, what you have to object, during the trial. Although you have to preserve the record so you can appeal. If he gets convicted and he gets sentenced to life, and he didn't know when to object, or to certain questions or certain evidence, that could make a big difference whether he's going to be able to be successful at appealing a conviction.
Jose, you talked about the attention that this case has gotten. What will you be looking for in this? And obviously, this comes with the caveat, we know cameras are not allowed inside federal court, so we're kind of getting this all from reporters inside. But what will you be kind of watching for to see come from this trial?
Well, you got to remember, this is not just. It's not just a battery case, not just a simple. This is here we're talking, the president of the United States. You have a judge here who's going to try to appear to be impartial. You also you're going to have to pick a jury who appears to be impartial, regardless of, there's obviously an element of politics in here. And then you also have an individual want to represent himself. I'm sure the court already determined that he's competent. Now, but just because you're competent and you understand the proceeding doesn't necessarily mean that you have the knowledge and the skill to be able to proceed in a trial. And that's something you can't come back later. The judge made it very clear in this type of cases. I see it all the time in court. If you want to proceed, you have the right to represent yourself. But the issue is, we're not going to have any slack. We're going to play by the same. We're not going to change the rules for you just because you don't know the procedure.
Jose Rivas, a criminal defense attorney, always appreciate your perspective and expertise. And thanks for joining us here on Florida Live today.
Thank you. Pleasure.